Well, all right, let's get started. And what we're working with here is Mark chapter 10, verses 32 through 52. And I'll go ahead and read that. And they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them, and they were amazed. And those who followed were afraid. And taking the 12 again, he began to tell them what was about to happen to him, saying, See, we are going to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priest, the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles. And they will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. And after 3 days, he will rise. And I have been struck with the speed, or should I say, the lack of speed that Jesus traveled. He used his feet. Every now and then he would use boats. And once he used a donkey. And he was in the moment. Whatever he was doing, he was in that moment. He was even on the journeys, he wasn't looking forward to the destination as though he had somewhere else he needed to be. He knew that he needed to be right there in that moment, teaching his disciples during the trip, during their travels. And the people that he was with, we see here that they were both amazed that Jesus wasn't more welcoming of the rich in the world. Right before this, you have the parable or the story of the rich young man who came, and Jesus essentially turned him away because the rich young man's heart wasn't in the right spot. He wasn't ready to make Jesus Lord and Savior of his life. Instead, the rich young man um, was looking more of being his own God and his money being what was going to keep him secure and him financially safe. Others were afraid. So, and I'm sure they were afraid because they were either wealthy themselves, or as the disciples had said earlier, if the rich can't be saved, what hope do we have? What hope is there for me if this rich man can't get saved? What kind of chance do I realistically have? And Jesus told them plainly what they were about to be walking into. He told them that while they were on the road to Jerusalem, and they were about to face the most challenging scene in human history. And Jesus did not speak in parables to them about this. Instead, he told them plainly. He told them that in 3 days he would rise. But before he told them that in 3 days he would rise, he told them that he would be delivered over to the chief priests, to the scribes, and they would condemn him to death. They would deliver them over to the Gentiles, to the Romans, who had just barbarous techniques of torture and ways to kill people, especially through crucifixion. And they would condemn him to death, and they would mock him, they would spit on him, they would flog him and kill him. But in 3 days he would rise. And I'm sure that the disciples had no idea what he meant when he said, in 3 days the sun will rise. Um, and to be honest, I'm not so sure we would have known either if we had been there with the disciples. But whatever they thought he meant, they were wrong, because we know that none of them stayed, because none of them expected Jesus to be arrested and go on trial and be condemned to death. Um, we go right in from that, though. So Jesus tells them this story, and here comes James and John. And I'll pick up James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And he said to them, What do you want me to do for you? And they said to him, Grant to us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. And Jesus said to them, You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I will drink, or to be baptized with the baptism which I am baptized? And they said to him, We are able. And Jesus said to them, The cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. The disciples throughout Jesus' ministry, when he had the disciples working with him, they were constantly exercising the worst timing that you can imagine. And they were constantly either not listening or they weren't hearing what Jesus was telling them. And they were instead, I feel like they were thinking about the next thing they were going to say to impress others around them about what that person knew, or they were thinking about what they were going to ask or request Jesus to do for them. And right here we have James and John. two of the three men in the inner circle of Jesus, they got to see just unbelievable aspects of Jesus that the other disciples were not privileged to. And they just heard Jesus talking about how he was going to die, how he was going to be turned over to the scribes and the Pharisees and mistreated and abused and killed. And they clearly did not understand what was about to happen, because if they did understand, then they would have, in a sense, been volunteering to be on the right side and the left side of him when he was crucified. And it would turn out that instead of having two friends on either side of him being crucified, both of his friends would leave him and he would hang between two criminals dying beside him. And as you can imagine, this whole scene here with James and John did not sit well with the rest of the disciples. These two brothers who were already going everywhere with Jesus, getting to go to these to the mountaintops that the other disciples weren't getting to, they were now asking for even more honor, more recognition, more privilege. And hadn't James and John just heard Jesus say that those who would be first would be last, and those that were last would be first? Jesus had just said this before to the rich young ruler, when he was telling them what it meant and telling them what they needed to do. Um, and they missed it. But it continues, though, because we know the other disciples, and when the 10 heard about it, they began to be indignant at James and John. And Jesus called them to him and said, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and give his life a ransom for many." Yes, the other 10 disciples were just a little bit angry. They were furious, if we want to be honest. But think about this, they were angry because they were jealous, not because they thought James and John was asking the wrong questions. They wanted to be in the position of power as well. And Jesus, sadly, is in the midst of a self centered group of people when he is about to go through the biggest crisis of his life yet. And instead of being comforted by his followers and his friends, he is having to keep them from fighting and tearing at each other. But I don't want to be too hard on the disciples and act as though we would have been any different, because what about us? Do we find ourselves so focused on me and you that we miss what Jesus is doing around us? Jesus pointed to the great societies of the Roman world, how the mighty, the rich, the powerful people, they rule over people and they use their authority in order to make others do things for them. Because you notice he says the Gentiles lord it over them. Okay, their ruler, their rule, they lord that power over people, and the great ones exercise authority over them. See, we're not to use power for our own benefit. Any power that we have, any authority that we have in this life, we are to use it for the glory of God, but also to help other people, to serve other people. When I'm teaching, the authority that I have as a teacher is not to be misused to make my life easier. Instead, my authority is to be used to help these children to learn and to learn how to live life, to learn how to love others, to learn about Jesus, hopefully. And that's what authority is for. Authority is not for me to wield over people to get my way. Instead, authority is for me to use to help the people underneath me in my authority. Uh, but that's not how we are expected. We have to serve people. Jesus was constantly trying to teach them and others this idea. And he went further than teaching it, he modeled it. Jesus lived out exactly what he wanted to see from his disciples and what he wants to see from us. And Jesus spent his whole ministry loving God and loving people. And we need to follow his example, not the examples of the leaders we see around us in the world. Moving on now to verses 46, we have Jesus gets an opportunity to do just that. And they came to Jericho. And as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples, a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and said, Call him. And they called the blind man, saying to him, Take heart, get up, he is calling you. And throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, What do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said, Rabbi, let me recover my sight. And Jesus said to him, Go your way, your faith has made you well. And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. Jesus rejected the rich man. He explained that he was about to die. James and John requested position and titles. The disciples exposed their jealousy. Jesus tried to teach them to serve, and a blind man is screaming for him. People around the blind man told him to be quiet, but he screamed all the louder. This man, Bartimaeus, knew that there was nothing that he could do that would correct his eyes. There was nothing he could do that would bring vision to his eyes. There was no secret chant he could say, no magic potion, nothing. It would only be through the mercy of Jesus that he would be made well. The rich man wanted to do it on his own. James and John thought they had earned it by what they had been through so far. The disciples fought to claim their spot, but Bartimaeus fully trusted in Jesus to make him well. And this is the message for us today. And I know it's short and to the point, though. Like Bartimaeus, we can't do anything on our own. We can only cry out to Jesus. We can only beg him to rescue, to cleanse, and make us whole. There is nothing that you nor I can do to earn, to work, to claim a salvation as our own, or to claim it for someone else. We must fully recognize that he loves us because he loves us. See, Jesus doesn't love us because of anything that I did. He doesn't love you because of anything that you did. He loves you because he loves you, which is great news because there's not anything we can do to earn this love. He gave it because he wanted to. But it's also great news because there's nothing that I can do to lose his love.